All your initial tableaus, the top row will always be linked to the objective function, the second row to your second constraint, the next row to your third constraint. If you had another constraint, you would have another row. What would have happened if I'd had three constraints? As well as having another row, what else would I have had to have had? Another slack variable. Yeah, I'd have had to introduce u. For that third constraint would have had to have a slack variable. That's right. Okay. The columns which have just got zeros and 1, 1 in them, they have a special name. Okay. So can we write down that the columns with all zeros and 1, 1 are called basic columns, or sometimes they're called basic variables. Well, they're called basic columns, the columns itself. And what you do, you find those columns and it actually tells you what the answer is at this point. It tells us at the moment what our solution is. It's not an optimal solution, but this is how you do it. So I'll just wait for people to stop writing. You start, well, ignore the Z one for time being. Where's the first column apart from that one with zeros and ones in? S. Okay, this one here. That means at the moment, if we manufacture 1 unit of S, and then there's another column here, and if we manufacture 1 unit of T, our profit, which is what Z is, our profit will be 0. Which is always how you actually start. You make nothing. Initially you're making nothing, except these slack ones over here. You always have your zeros and ones in your S, T and U if you need it column. And the way to read it is, you find your zeros and ones, and if you make one of those, and if you make one of those, your profit, which is always what Z is, will be 0. It's not very helpful at the moment, but when we come and do something else in a minute, we will end up with a different version of the tableau, and that is still how we read it. Okay? Actually, when I said at the moment we make 1 of S, that's not quite right. We don't make 1 of S, we actually make 120 of S. You ought to have gone over here. We make 120 of S, we make 150 of T, and our profit is 0. Okay? It all sounds very strange to start with, I realise that. We'll go on. Hopefully it'll make a bit more sense, but you need to go on for it to make any more sense. Right, we need to know, how would we know when we've finished with a tableau, when it's optimal? So, we need to write down an optimality condition, and then this is something you need to learn. So, can we write down an optimality condition? Because we're going to do something to the table to change it, and every time we change it we need to look back and say, is it optimal? And this is it. If the objective row of a tableau has 0 entries, that doesn't mean no entries, it means there are zeros in there, 0 entries in the basic columns. Now at the moment, does our objective row have 0 entries in the basic columns? Because the basic columns are these two, and it does have 0 entries in the objective row. But then there's and something else has to happen, and no negative entries in the non-basic columns. Then that means you have an optimal solution. We said we have at the moment 0 entries in the basic columns. The basic columns are the ones with zeros and ones in. It's the here and here, the S and the T. But do we also have no negative entries in the non-basic columns of the objective row? No, we don't. So at the moment, that minus 10 and that minus 12 mean at the moment we are not optimal. So we can just say, in our existing tableau, the minus 10 and minus 12 in the objective row mean we are not optimal.
Oh, it's just the negative in the objective?
Yes, it's just the objective row, ones you look at for the non-basic ones. And if you're not optimal at the moment, that means you need to create a new tableau. And what we're going to do now is run through the steps of how you make a new tableau, a new table. Are we going okay, or are we going a bit too fast at the moment? Okay? Right.